Good morning and welcome to the new episode of Dr. Lamba's Awakening Call. It is human nature, but exemplified amplified rather, when we see that at the national level, at the country level, it's very common to criticize, to censor, and to condemn others. Human beings normally see a lot of fault in others, but their own they cannot visualize. And today, in the geopolitical world, there are two issues, major, or rather three: water, pandemic, and pollution. Now, in pollution, some countries have been blamed for very high pollution. China and India are supposed to be the worst polluters. The reality is the other way around. The worst polluters are not China and India, but are the so-called G8 countries. And number one in them is Canada. Can you believe it? People call it heaven on earth. And yet Canada is the worst offender as a carbon emitter. And then they blame India and China. It's a classic case of a pot calling the kettle black. Earlier, a UN panel issued a very stern warning that without a radical reduction in the greenhouse gas emissions, the world is dangerously close to runaway warming. Fair enough. But then, how to do it? Identification of the worst offenders is important. And we don't do it because we are blinded by propaganda, by prejudice, and by misinformation. I was looking at a report from Berlin-based think tank, and that shows Canada is behind other wealthy countries when it comes to cutting carbon emissions. And that also report outlines concrete steps that individuals, governments and business should take so that the world limit warming to the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal is achieved. The report is called 1.5 degree lifestyles towards a fair consumption space for all. It was produced by Hot or Cool Institute, and it compares 10 countries selected to represent a range of income levels: Canada, Finland, UK, Japan, China, Turkey, South Africa, Brazil, India, and Indonesia. Now, these 10 countries from different continents, different values, different lifestyles, and different political systems have been selected as representative. Out of these countries, do you know which country has the worst per capita record so far? And that is Canada, the so-called heaven on earth, the so-called custodian of good governance. Isn't it amazing? The other per capita emitters are not included in the report, curiously, Australia and USA. Now the analysis compared the average per capita carbon emission of people of each of these countries, a metric the term as the average lifestyle carbon footprint. And it curiously focuses on key domains where tangible lifestyles can make a significant difference. And those differences are food, housing, and personal transportation. Now, these are the worst emitters of carbon. The average person in Canada produces an equivalent of 14.2 tons of carbon dioxide. Finland, 9.7 tons. UK, 8.5 tons. India, 3.2 tons. Now, who is the worst offender? Canada 14.2, India 3.2, and we blame India. Curiously, even China, which is often blamed, produces 1/3 of the carbon emission, 1/3 of Canadian carbon emission. Now, this shows that Canada needs to cut its per capita emission by 95% by 2015 if it wants to remain within the limit of 1.5 degrees. But do we blame the individuals for that? No. Canada's infrastructure is the worst possible offender. And if Canada has to play its part, the country will need to cut per capita emissions by 82% in the next decade and 95% by 2050. Is that possible? You tell me. According to me, it's not possible. Reducing 95% of your carbon emission means stopping all activity practically. Eating meat. So they come with a plant-based meat, but then they forget that when you use plant-based meat, you are cutting down the plants. Using fossil fuel cars, they say come to electric cars, and batteries are polluting, now number one. Number two, those batteries would be charged with the same fossil fuels electricity. Living in large houses with high energy consumption, these are the life choice methods, and you can't ignore that. And as a matter of fact, there is no universally sustainable lifestyle. The only universally sustainable lifestyle will be old cave type, mud houses. Now, if you have a mud house, you don't need an air conditioner because the mud itself is an excellent air conditioner. But how many Jeff Bezos and Gates, Soros, Ambani's, Jack Ma's would like to live in the mud house? Then, if one must use a car, then using electric car might mean some sense in a country like Iceland. You'll be amazed. But Iceland is the only country in the world where 100% electricity comes from non-polluting sources, renewables. But not in India, where electricity is primarily generated from coal, not in Canada. Many European countries, such as Germany and the UK, have started investing in technologies to cut carbon emissions. And they did it much before Canada even thought of it. Today it's too late. But then, what the Canadian politicians do? They blame other countries without looking at themselves. And at themselves, what they do? They increase the taxes, which are not at all effective. As a matter of fact, the European countries like Germany and UK and even USA, they have done great jobs in reducing the carbon imprints. And then we forget the government in Canada is asking the individuals to change. You don't need only individuals, yes, but the policies have to be framed that the businesses are forced to come on board with viable products that are sustainable. But what the government here is doing is just having citizens taking action, and government is waiting for citizens to change their lifestyles. Canada doesn't have that luxury. Then The concept behind this 1.5 degree lifestyle report was to take the target of limiting warming to 1.5 degree above pre-industrial level. The industrialized countries, if they go back to the pre-industrial level, this just done in modeling, not in real life. You have to establish an equitable carbon imprint for the individuals. Now, look at the reality. The number to shoot for is zero point 0.7 tons of carbon dioxide per capita each year. And in order to hit that track, the average should be 2.5 tons by the year 2030. Again, according to the climatologists, this is not possible because 65% of that is because of the natural reasons. And preventing runaway global warming, extreme weather, will require changing how you get around, how you heat your homes, how you cool your homes, and what you eat. If your lifestyle, your way of living, your way of moving, how many people move in Canada through the public transport? They say Canada was built for the cars, or the cars were built. What happened when the cars were not there? Were the Canadians not living? But no, we have been forced to adopt those modes to sustain the manufacturing process. And much of the responsibility lies with countries like Canada, where the per capita consumptions are 6 times higher than that of India, as we saw it. India averages 2.2 tons per person annually. Canadians love for food and dairy. Dairy is one of the most polluting things. But no government till today has talked of dairy because the dairy farmers are a unionized lot, and touching them would be touching a hornet's nest. Keeping house heated is a major factor. Yes, I agree, because of the climate. But why do we have the air conditioning? We cross 20 degrees and air conditioners start humming. And I've seen in some of the places, in the condominiums, because air conditioning is there, they have the air conditioning on and they open the windows. Fresh air. So why can't you have fresh air without the air conditioning on? While Canadians cannot help that they have long, cold winters, their reliance on natural gas should be sufficient. And are you aware that Canada has huge capability of using 2 renewable sources, which they have not done? One is a geothermal energy, which Iceland is doing. The geothermal energy, because of our huge coastline, is a tremendous thing. I remember when I was in Mississauga, I had a talk with Hazel McCallion, and then she called the builders. And the builders agreed, and some 25 houses were built along the Credit River, and all of them didn't have electricity connection from the companies. Each house was having geothermal, and the cost of each house having geothermal capability was just $25,000 initially, and maybe a couple of $1,000 after 5 years for the maintenance. Otherwise, it's free. And yet, despite the availability of geothermal energy, we are not doing it. Government is not doing it. It's not interested, because they think that if the energy companies go out, then they would have lost a cash cow. Those, like the insurance companies, compel them to force. So that being so, it's not possible for anybody to do anything. As a matter of fact, we have to see that the people understand the reality of life. Now, compare it to a lower middle class country like India. Living spaces are much smaller, and a significant portion of the population lives in poverty. I'm not saying poverty should be here, but you can have compact houses. And as a result of that, the living houses being comparatively smaller, the overall energy demand is low. And then the living conditions, the architecture. You remember in the old days, the igloos used to house the native Canadians. They didn't have warming, they didn't have air conditioning, but the way they were built was enough to protect them both from the cold and from the heat. So what you need is innovation in architecture and in building. We have got now a white paint. You have a huge palace, immaterial, but painted with that new paint which has come. And you don't need warming, heat, you don't need air conditioning. How much you save in the infrastructure? As a matter of fact, the popularity of the style and the way you live is much more important. And then it's not that alone. It's an attitude, basically. And the attitude is much more important. Take Japan, for example. Japan is a very advanced country. People are less dependent on cars because they have a reliable, efficient public transit system. Do we have such a system in Canada? No. I was just looking at VR, and the cost of a ticket of a VR is much more than that of an air. Now compare it, an average Japanese person transport contributes 1,970 kilograms of carbon dioxide to the carbon footprint. What does Canadian do? He contributes 5,000. It's more than double that of Japanese. There's another factor. If the Canadians want to lower their footprints, meat products make up for 61% of the average Canadian food carbon footprint. And it adds to 2,270 kilograms of carbon dioxide per year. Per person, imagine it. I'm not saying banish meat, but you can add it up. And then you can have a different quality of meat. Why have steak all the time? The bad news is that we have a bad record in Canada, that the people are spoiled and the government is not bothered about. We have high emissions compared to the other wealthy countries in the world, and we are not doing anything. Then housing related carbon footprint again is shocking. The housing related carbon footprint in Canada is 3.05. In India it's 0.43. Finland 1.75. UK 1.89. Now even compared to UK and Finland, Canada is 3 times more. Is there any logic in what's happening? I don't think so. Then what is to be done? Canada has committed to cutting emissions by 40% by 2030 and zero emission by 2050. These are on paper, not in reality. What is lacking is a plan, and Canada doesn't have a plan. And the plan is to be firmly outlining how those targets will be reached, especially when the energy sector continues to rely on oil and gas. That's the worst thing. You produce energy on oil and gas. You have got excellent hydro, you are not utilizing it excellently. You have got geothermal, you are not utilizing. You have got wind, you are not utilizing it. Look at the wind, the speed of the wind. You have got tidal power, you are not using it. So if you use the tidal power, if you use the wind, if you use the geothermal energy, if you use hydro, then your 82% of the voluntary emission would be reduced. Involuntary would continue, which is based on the natural factors. Now the question arises, is the government thinking on those lines? I was amazed that Canada had a Minister of Innovation. And at that time I made a remark, does he know the meaning of innovation? An Indian sitting on the roadside, a roadside mechanic knows more about innovation than the whole body of scientists in Canada do. They gave it a local term called jugaad. They are so innovative by nature. China, extremely innovative. Here, innovation is not nurtured. If it comes by accident, fine. Canadians have been great inventors and innovators, yes. But it is by default, not by nurture. We need innovation by nurture. And that's possible. But all this, changing the infrastructure, public transport, generation of electricity, architecture, is a compendium of innovative thinking. And that is lacking. Till that time, this innovative thinking becomes a way of life and living and thought. Canada would continue to be where it is, a leader in pollution, the worst polluter in the world, and yet posing to be holier than thou, clean, which it is not. Let Canada wake up. Let people wake up. And let government wake up. That's a crying need. Thank you.